Hi, everybody. Today is Thursday, March 19th, and we are on our second day of our Bible study of the book of Mark. Just to let you know, I've been calling, checking on people. If I haven't gotten to you yet, I will soon. I just want everybody out there to make sure that they are staying healthy, checking on people maybe who need help as well. You might notice that this is the second one this week. I have decided that this format will be better to work for about 20 minutes, probably 4 days a week, maybe 5. And I have had some requests maybe to do something special for Sundays. I'm going to figure that out. Maybe try to do something different on Sunday. So just keep watching the blog and look for updates there. Follow me on Facebook, and I will always post when something new is up. Well, as nobody had any questions about Mark from last time, let's go into chapter 2. So we're picking up right after there was a story of a man healed with leprosy. And now we're picking up another healing story in Mark chapter 2. So, a few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. So many gathered there that there was no room left, not even outside the door. He preached the word to them. Soon men came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus, and after digging through it, lowered the mat the paralyzed man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now, some teachers of the law were sitting there thinking to themselves, "Why does this fellow talk like that? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts. He said to them, "Why are you thinking these things? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up, take up your mat, and walk'? But that you may know the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic, "I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home." He got up, took his mat, and walked out in full view of all of them. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." Okay, a couple of interesting things in this section of Mark. First of all, this is another story you've heard a slightly different version of. Luke tells the story uh, of the men climbing on the roof and picking up the tiles. Luke is relating his story to a Greco-Roman audience, Western Roman Empire, different style houses. They wouldn't have understood digging through the roof. Here, Mark's story is probably the original. The story of digging through the roof would have been appropriate in a ancient Near Eastern house with flat sod roofs. But there's some interesting theological points here as well. These men go out of their way to help their friend. They know Jesus can heal him. They have seen him heal others. They think he can heal our friend. And so they go up to the roof, they dig their way in. Can you imagine being there listening to a Bible study and suddenly there's this noise? I was at a church one time where there were squirrels in the drop ceiling. So I have a kind of an idea of what it must have sounded like, but never breaking in. Actually, come to think of it, at that same church, a light fixture did fall, so maybe I do know what it's like. Regardless, these people come in, they lower the mat, and Jesus, seeing their faith, not the paralyzed man's faith, seeing their faith, the faith of the four that brought him, he said, "My son, your sins are forgiven." I think that is something for us to contemplate. His sins are forgiven by somebody else's actions. I don't really know what fully to make of that. But I do think that it is an important thing for us to realize that what we do affects other people in ways that we don't know and don't expect. That here these guys who've made an effort to get to Jesus, and what the friend receives immediately is a spiritual thing, not a physical one. A lot of times we feel called by God to do something, and we think we know why. But in the end, maybe God has a different purpose. I know lots of times in my life, I have done things thinking I knew the reason, knowing that I was following the will of God, and I thought I knew why. But in the end, I realized God had a different purpose. And so too here. The teachers of the law, the Pharisees, get upset. This is blasphemy. How can you say his sins are forgiven? Only God can forgive sins. And Jesus says, well, yeah, that's the point. Well, he didn't come quite out and say this, but he says, so that you will know the Son of Man, and again, that's a reference back to Isaiah's suffering servant, so that you will know the Son of Man has the power to forgive sins. He turns to the man and says, get up, take your mat and go home. Jesus' command over the world is complete. He demonstrates that here. When we read passages like this, they may be familiar, but it is beneficial to us if we take our time and ask questions. What would it be like to see this event? Why does Jesus say your sins are forgiven when the man is not even asked for that? Why do the Pharisees have such a problem? Let's continue. Once again, Jesus went out beside a lake at the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him. Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." If you want a longer version of this story, look in Matthew. But we have Jesus calling of somebody that would have considered an outsider. Uh, Somebody who, as a Jew, had become a traitor by working for the Romans. Nevertheless, Jesus embraces him, goes to his house to eat. And apparently, lots of people that the religious leaders didn't like followed Jesus. People they considered sinners. And they asked him about this. Why do you associate yourselves with these people? And I think that Jesus' reply could be restated like this. I come for the people who know they need me, not for the ones who think they don't. That awareness of need is profoundly important in our spiritual growth. As long as we think we've got everything together, as long as we think, oh, we're doing the right thing, we don't need to grow, we don't need to change, we're not going to. Jesus heals the ill, those who are aware of their need. The Pharisees thought they were doing everything right. I am sure, like many religious people of our day, they would say, well, yeah, there's room for growth, and maybe I need to read more of the Bible, maybe I need to give a little more of my money, but I'm basically okay. Jesus doesn't have time for those people because they don't have time for him. Verse 18. Now, as John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, some people came and asked Jesus, how is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not? Jesus answered, how can the guests, the bridegroom, fast, while he is with them? They cannot. So long as they have him with them, the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and on that day they will fast. Okay. This is, in some ways, the first instance in Mark we have hinting at the crucifixion, hinting at the going away. But even more than that, this is referring to a time after the ascension. Remember what I said in our last episode about Mark's audience being afraid. A fasting attitude, an attitude of prayer and contemplation and eagerly seeking God. That's where they were. They were in a place where the bridegroom had left. Jesus, again, is not particularly concerned with religious ritual. He's got his own agenda. And it's not the traditional one. Also notice how often we're having people argue with Jesus. Mark's gospel, again, is written to people who were experiencing persecution. Mark is in a way saying, look, they treated Jesus with this way too. They harassed him. They're going to harass you. And then we have this somewhat familiar passage. No one sews a patch on unshrunk cloth. Sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. No one pours new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins. Both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, he pours new wine into new wineskins. Okay, again, Jesus is not really interested in the old ways. Jesus is talking about something new. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, is our way of saying this. It's the idea that those who are unwilling and unable to change cannot be used by God. I think it's a fair question for us to ask. In what ways am I unwilling to change? In what ways am I willing to say, I will go this far, but no further, Jesus? I'll do anything, but not that. If we present ourselves as stiff, if we choose not to be stretched, we're just going to pop, not be used at all. I'm going to read now down, beginning in chapter 2, verse 23. And we're going to continue down through chapter 3, verse 6, because while there are two instances here, there's definitely a break in the language at chapter 3. The two stories are connected. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read that David, when he and his companions were hungry and in need? The days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. He also gave some to his companions." Then he said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." You ask people, what is the Sabbath for? And typically they would say worship. Jesus contradicts that. We forget how much the law is about taking care of ourselves and others, and taking care of the world around us. The Sabbath laws are not about worship. They're about care for other human beings. Another time he went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Jesus asked him, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to kill?" And they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger, and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. The Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. The churches I grew up in, none of them would have thought of closing for any reason. They would have been the kind of people who said, "Oh, well, it's worship of God. God will protect you." Sometimes we need to make choices that are contrary to our traditions, contrary to religious expectations, for the benefit of others. Over and over, what we see Jesus doing in these stories is taking care of people, healing people. He's not worried about religious propriety. He's not worried about looking right or sounding right. He's only worried about doing what is right. Something that we should all remember, especially when we make decisions about our churches, our lives, about how we're going to act. God calls us to be servants, to be healers, to be comforters, to go alongside those in need. And if sometimes that means skipping church, if sometimes that means doing things that good Christians don't do, that's what we do. Because our judge is not other people, but God himself. Okay. Tomorrow we will pick up with chapter 3. beginning in verse 7, where we have crowds following Jesus. The meantime, I hope you'll be taking care of yourself. If you are a member of Fort Wayne Baptist Church, I hope you are reading your devotional that we brought for Lent, Walter Brueggemann's A Way Other Than Our Own. I continue to find it challenging and interesting. And I think given especially this time where our lives are so changed, now is a good time to consider a change of ways as well. My plan is Tuesday through Friday to do a 20-minute or so blog. And I will have something special for us on Sunday. I just don't know exactly what that's going to be yet. Again, if you need me, you know where to find me. And I am getting around and I'm calling people, and I will check on you soon if I haven't already. Thanks again. Bye.